Hello and welcome back to another Sunday school lesson. As you can see, it's a completely different game. Just before I went to do this, the PlayStation 4 once again shut down, so I'm actually showing this pretty cool looking area of New Zealand in Hitman 2, so we'll wander around this level and discuss it. I'm using this game in particular because it's the easiest one to kind of get to a point where I can do one of these videos and wander around and discuss it like that. So that's what we are going to do. So we are in Alma 43 through 52, and it's titled Stanfast in the Faith of Christ. Now, this is where the Book of Mormon kind of goes in a direction you don't really expect it to go in. It basically pretty much stops most of its religious teachings and proceeds to basically give a history of war. And this is kind of an odd direction, especially when you consider that Mormon, who was abridging the Book of Mormon, did not have very much space or time to record many things. So he prioritized, let's see, a good chunk of the Book of Mormon discusses war and the preparations for war, and goes into pretty big detail about the war, about where it's going. Now, the interesting thing about all these chapters is that it's pretty much a metaphor for so many scriptural things and how we live and guide our lives. On one level, it deals with like the tragedies of war and strategy that are employed in wars at this time. So it's fascinating for anyone who studies, these sort of things or strategy and stuff like that. It's actually quite fascinating, just from that point of view. However, because it's also metaphorical and also really telling us how we can prepare, it's of great value from a religious sense. So there's so much value to kind of these chapters that we don't really acknowledge, and we don't really realize just how important they are when we read them. When I was a kid reading them, they were very much, oh, cool, a cool battle, that is so awesome, man. That's how you think when you're a kid. And they were just fun parts of the Book of Mormon to read. And, now looking back on them as an adult, as someone, who's interested in philosophy, interested in religion, and interested in strategy, they have everything. They're great chapters to read. And if you go into it with the idea that, there's more to it than we realize. There are, so many ways this can apply into our lives, and just keep an open mind when you go into it and say, now how does this apply to me? How does this fit for me? I think that's true of all scriptures, but I think in this section it applies a lot more because it's not immediately obvious how it applies to you when you read it. But anyway, this entire lesson kind of deals with this basically how it applies in our lives. So the first section says, the battle in the Book of Mormon teaches me about my battles against evil. So basically, like I said, these chapters go into a lot of details of war, of how war is conducted, and how we prepare ourselves for the war, for the battles. It goes into a great detail about that, and it's applicable to ourselves and our lives. The thing it reminds me of, I forget the exact reference. It's in Ephesians, where it talks about the armor of God and uses the metaphor of a soldier or a warrior putting on armor to go into battle, comparing it to how we armor ourselves and we prepare ourselves. And a good chunk of these chapters deal with how how Moroni, who was the captain, started to prepare cities for wars, and he goes into a lot of detail about how he does that. So to break it down, he basically took a normal city, had them basically dig all around the city, making kind of essentially a hill surrounding the city leading up to it. He put in these beams that were about the same size as like wooden beams. They're about 6 feet tall, so about the same size as a man. Were put on there, and then on top of these beams, they built essentially sturdy walls. And what this did, just from a strategy point of view, what it did was it basically made it so anybody attacking the city could be seen from the walls of the city. Not only that, if they had to attack, they had to essentially fight uphill. And pretty much people with arrows can just rain them down on you if you attack the city. Arrows just rain down on you, and pretty much it's is killbox the right word? Probably not, but I think it conveys the impression. It's not a situation where if you're attacking this well-fortified city that it's going to do you any good. It's pretty much suicide to attack a city fortified like this, at least directly attack and charge up the hill after them. And I believe there are cases in the Book of Mormon where attacks were made and nobody on the inside was killed, but hundreds of Lamanites who were attacking were killed. So it's very good, very solid preparations for war, and and the metaphor that's given is that's pretty much how we should prepare ourselves when we face sin. That we should, armor ourselves. We should, protect ourselves from sin. Basically, put it in such a way that sin cannot get to us. That there's no avenue, no opening for sin to get to us. Now, I was hoping, but the PlayStation died again, but I was hoping to actually do Ghosts of Tsushima, the recent samurai game, as a game that I played while talking about this particular lesson, because there's something really interesting in Ghosts of Tsushima. Basically, what caught my eye and the comparison that just clicked in my head is that there are fortresses that you have to essentially take over or take back from the Mongol invaders, and oftentimes you can pretty much just sneak right in to each of these fortifications. Usually there's some sort of flaw in the defenses. Let me rephrase that. There's always a flaw in the defenses that you can exploit, whether it's the timbers are a little far apart or aren't complete. Sometimes there's rocks or other things near the gates that you can climb up to and then use that to jump over the gates. In one case, there's actually a fortress that's backed against rocky mountains. It's a big rock. I'll say mountain. It's big enough to be a mountain. That you can actually scale the mountain and use, use that to get into the location, to get into this fortress. There's always a small little area that apparently the people who are building them or designing them didn't realize existed, that you can exploit in every single case. You have that option, that way to exploit and take advantage of the weaknesses in the fortifications, and take back fortresses or take down these camps or these fortresses. That's essentially the gameplay. And that's, for me, such a great metaphor for this entire this lesson, this entire thing. It's that there's even the smallest little chink in our armor, just a little flaw in what we've done, can and will be exploited. And that's the thing. And I don't think heavy-handed is the right word, but because there's so many chapters, pretty much the next 2 lessons cover 20 chapters, all of which are about war. But there are so many chapters in the Book of Mormon just straight up about war, and the greatest lesson of scriptures, the thing that if you ever read scriptures, you ever study it, that you should 100% take away is when scriptures repeat themselves, that's when you should start listening and start paying attention, because that's when they have something of importance to tell you. So, like I said, I maybe I'm hammering this point home a little bit too much, but I think it is important to remember that, that we should protect ourselves. We should fortify our lives. And, kind of this will be the lesson, the takeaway from this lesson, or homework, I should say, for this lesson, is to take a look at your own lives and say, what are the chinks in my armor? Where are my weaknesses? How do I avoid situations where these weaknesses will be exploited? There was a great show on television called Leverage. It was a really great show, but one of the characters, this is a really interesting point, spends most of the show anyway as an alcoholic. So at one point he is essentially recovering from being an alcoholic, and he goes into a bar and orders like a $20 drink. So he picks up the drink, looks at it, sniffs it, puts it down, and put the money, and just leaves the drink without drinking it. And one of the interesting things the show's creators said was that they got a lot of positive feedback about this scene from a lot of people who were so impressed with the character's self-control and how he did it. And the show's creators were amused by this because they never thought of it being taken that way. Because anyone who's in addiction recovery, or anyone who's, a former alcoholic, anything like that, knows that's absolutely the wrong thing to do if you're recovering from an addiction. You don't surround yourself with your addiction. You basically go out of your way to avoid the things, the triggers, your addictions, the things that you're addicted to, the things that would trigger you to be more addicted. You go, or to, fall back into old patterns or habits, you avoid it 100%. And I think the fact that a lot of people thought that this was a really good thing that this character did kind of shows that we as humans don't often realize what's best for us. So, if you have a chink that can be exploited, if you have a weakness, if, say you have a weakness for gambling, for example, the one thing you should do is don't go into a casino. Don't go online and search out like online gambling establishments. Don't do things like that. And that's really what will help you overcome your addiction there. It will help you protect you against those chinks in your armor. And yeah, so I think that's one of the biggest points of this lesson, of this section of the scriptures, is really how we should defend ourselves, how we should fortify ourselves against sin and against, temptations, against anything that might cause us to commit sins or do bad things. And you know what? We're not going to be perfect. There always be flaws with us. There will always be things that we'll always do things that we really shouldn't do. But as long as we're improving, and as long as we kind of move forward, we are doing well. So that kind of leads into this second little segment here, which says, as I strive to be faithful like Moroni, I will become more like the Savior. So Moroni, Captain Moroni, there are 2 Moronis in the Book of Mormon. This is Captain Moroni. He was a really strong and really faithful man. As the scriptures say of him, it basically says, if every man was like Captain Moroni, the gates of hell would shudder and fall over and have no power. I can't remember. I should quote that exactly, but I don't remember offhand. I'm obviously not perfect. Whoa, deep. Anyway, that is, what sort of man he was. He was very faithful. He worked very hard, and he was a staunch defender of liberty, of freedom, of liberty. And what this section, one of the things this section covers is what was it? My brain just went dead because my brain just says Statue of Liberty, and that's not what it is. It was there's a specific name. Basically, he ripped his an old coat he had, tied it up, wrote on it. Let's see, for our liberty, for our freedom, for our religion, for our gods, for our family, for all the things that we should fight for. And he raised it up as a flag and went around and recruited people to fight in this war, by waving essentially the flag of liberty. I wish I could remember what it was called. But anyway, he was a great man, a staunch defender of freedom, of our people, the freedoms, that we oftentimes will take for granted, all these wonderful freedoms we have, and we won't realize how good we have it. We will see ourselves as being, if we don't get everything that we want, like children, we will see ourselves as being very, oppressed and very, we don't have liberties, and, we'll be very upset with the system or the man or things like that, and we won't, if you're thinking like that, this is my advice. Just take a step back, look around and say, just look at your life and say, do I have it good? Is this a good life? Or isn't it a good life? And, we'll leave it at that point. Ask yourself, just count your blessings and look at your life and then say, is this liberty? Is all these great things I have, is that worth fighting for? And it's not I'm not speaking necessarily of fighting as a soldier fights or so on, although, yeah, if you're a soldier, yay. That came out wrong. If you're a soldier and if you're fighting for freedom, all respect to you. But, if you're not a soldier, if you're just a civilian, if you're just someone who doesn't fight, if you just don't do anything, are you willing to stand up for your freedoms? If someone, say, just challenges your religious beliefs, do you just kind of cave? If somebody comes up to you and says, basically says, challenges you with the philosophies of man over the philosophies of God, and tells you that you're a horrible person for your beliefs, are you going to stand up for your beliefs, or will you go the way of the world? And, I've been in many, many classes, and everybody knows the correct answer is to stand up for your beliefs. But when push comes to shove, when you get into that position, it's not so easy to just stand up for your beliefs, to, face your friends and possibly lose your friends because they have a different belief system than you. That's a challenging choice that you have to figure out and make for yourself. And really, are you going to be faithful, or aren't you going to be faithful to your own beliefs? And really, the more faithful you are, and the more you strive to be faithful and do the best you can, do that, the more Christ-like you will become. And, the better person you will be, the more friendly, the, more helpful, more loving, kind a person you will be. And that's important. So, with this next section here, I'm going to go back to kind of the metaphor I told you about with the fortress and the little flaws that allow Jin, the main character of Ghost of Tsushima, to get into certain places. And I suppose the metaphor can be carried into this game too. So Agent 47, that's pretty much all he does is sees opportunities and flaws in his opponents, in security systems and things like that, and he exploits them. He can, blend in by changing clothes. He can do all these little things to exploit the flaws and to accomplish his objectives. And, that's pretty much the same way that the devil behaves. And the title of the next little section is Satan Deceives Us Little by Little. And, sorry, I was walking into the wall there. But that's really how it works. We are deceived little by little. I mean, what can it hurt? One small little thing, what's that going to hurt? It's always something little. It's kind of the Doritos metaphor. It's like one Dorito, yeah, that won't cause me to break my diet. Except Doritos are really good. So you eat one, then you eat another, and then you eat another, and pretty soon you've eaten a whole bag, your diet's ruined, and, you might go to bed with a tummy ache. And, that's kind of a silly metaphor, but that's really how it works. It's like one little sin, yeah, it's not gonna be really bad if you commit one tiny little sin. If you do one little bad thing, it's not gonna be bad. And then, little by little, once you do a bad thing once, it's easier to do it again, and it's easier to justify doing that little sin or justifying doing a lot more. For those of you who haven't read it, there's a great book by Rex Stout. It's a murder mystery called Murder by the Book. There's an interesting segment in it where there's pretty much a good chunk of what's been happening, of the mystery, of what's been going on. The murderer basically writes, what he did and his thought process in committing the crimes. And there's a really interesting part where he, after having committed a crime, which after committing a murder that is, from the point of view of the murderer, was justified. It was to protect himself. It was to do that. Now he finds himself in the position of wanting to murder, or not wanting to murder, but in a position where somebody, a completely innocent woman, has knowledge of what he did, doesn't realize she has the knowledge, doesn't realize it could hurt him, but she has that knowledge, and he's trying to think about what he should do, how to justify killing her or stopping her from revealing this knowledge to anyone else. And he's going through this thought process. This person, if you take a step back and look at it, she's really not a threat to him, but could potentially be a threat if people figured out what she knew. And he's trying to figure out, what he should do. And he's just in there thinking, and he starts thinking about it. It's like, okay, I was completely justified in killing the first guy. And that. So I'm still a good, decent, moral man, even though I killed someone. So the normal attitudes of morality of killing people must logically be wrong, since I'm still a good person. So anytime I kill anyone, it's morally acceptable. And then he states that using this same sort of logic, he could have committed any number of murders. And that's kind of how it eats away at us. It's one small, that's kind of an extreme example, but that's kind of how our brain rationalizes things. We're still a good person. No matter what we do, we still will think of ourselves as a good person. We're the hero of our own stories. Everything we do has to be, justified and justifiable. So if we're doing something wrong, whether it's, a sin or whether it's societally wrong, we usually take a step back and look at it and say, it's like, the normal attitude towards this action, whatever it may be. Let's say eating Doritos. You excessively eat Doritos. That's a relatively safe metaphor, I think. We'll take a step back at it and look at it and say, the general attitude is I shouldn't eat so many Doritos. Here are the justifications. They're not healthy. I should get a more balanced diet, etc., etc. But, I'm essentially a good, healthy person, so, yeah, the normal justifications for not eating Doritos must be wrong. And that's the basic justification our brains will pretty much always do when we're confronted with sin, and we're confronted with this concept, this idea that, maybe I did something wrong. It's very easy for our brain to kind of take that and say, yeah, but I'm still a good person, so what I did must not have been wrong. Now that's really shortcuts the thought process, but that's essentially how our brain goes and works. And really, if it's hard to function if we think of ourselves as an evil person. It's very hard to function, but it's also that will impede us from repenting, from fixing our sins, but it also will impede us in that we'll just be constantly justifying our sins. Every action will be easier and easier to justify until, we're doing some really horrible things, and, we won't even bat an eye or blink at it. And that's kind of how it goes, and that's how we get caught up doing these sins. It's always easy to look at when we look at somebody. It's interesting when neighbors describe someone who's committed horrible crimes, they almost always say that they were, a good, solid, good, quiet member of the community, nice, solid person, not the type of person who would do this sort of things. And we don't always realize that how they slowly get to the point where, they do terrible things. And each of us is capable of doing terrible things, and, the devil will, very calmly and very happily lead us down the path and excuse me, down the path to hell. Very calmly, very slowly, very benignly, very nicely. It'll be a very sweet, very, appetizing, appetizing path, I suppose is the right word. It's a very, it's a nice path. It doesn't look like a path to hell. It looks like a really great place, and the devil will be happy to lead us in that general direction. Give us a little nudge, it's okay just this once. Don't worry, you can eat the entire bag of Doritos. It's fine. And that's how we get led, and that's how we kind of get caught and taken into these areas. So, yeah, kind of went off on that whole metaphor. Hopefully that's all good. So the final section is unity brings safety. So that's one of the things. If we have support, if we have help from other people, if we have a problem, say Dorito addiction, if we have help from other people, they can, help us to avoid Doritos, help us to know what we should do and how we should act and behave to correct our Dorito problem. And really, even I think if you approach someone and said, I have a problem, I eat too many Doritos, most people would find it ridiculous. But, our true friends will say, that's an interesting problem, a little bit ridiculous, but you know what, I understand. You're serious about this. I understand you have this problem. Here, let me help you. Let me see what I can do to help you. And really, the more united we are, the closer we are to friends, to loved ones, people who genuinely care for us and want to protect us, and we want to protect them, the easier it will be to avoid temptation. The hardest time to avoid any sort of temptation is when we're alone, when we feel alone, when we feel like nobody loves or understands us, and we have no friends. I think Lewis... No. I was going to say Lewis Carroll, but that's not right. It's... my brain has just gone dead on the author's name. The guy who wrote the Narnia Chronicles. Yeah, my brain's gone dead. But he wrote a book called the Screwtape Letters, which was essentially a devil speaking to a younger devil and explaining how to tempt men. It's a really interesting book. But at one point he says, when mankind looks around him, and sees himself alone, thinks that he is alone, and thinks that even God has deserted him, we have succeeded in our objectives. So when we are alone, when we are vulnerable, or when we are alone, we are at our most vulnerable, and we really don't, we're primed, we're ripe. When we feel like we have no friends, when we feel like, there's no one there to be with us, to support us, then, we are ripe for destruction. That's the devil's playground right there. We are very easy prey, I should say, when we're alone. And it's like, with animals. Any animal on its own, any prey animal on its own is very much predator fodder. That's a funny way to put it, but that's how it is. That's how it works. We are prey, and we are for the devil and his temptations. He wants to make us all miserable, and really, when we are alone, when we are off on our own, and we're very vulnerable, temptations of the devil. But when we're united, when we are with people, that's when we're safe. That's when, we have that support. We have friends who can help us. We can do that. And oftentimes, we don't even have to tell them about our problems. I mean, if you're fighting an addiction, sometimes just being around someone and talking about any old thing is exactly what we need. And it's when we feel alone that we're open to pretty much all sorts of temptations, all sorts of vulnerabilities. Even like overly, when we get overly emotional, I'm not speaking that in a bad way, but like when we get, depressed or super angry or super, just when we have that overabundance of emotions to the point where it's harmful to us, generally it's when we feel alone, like we're the only ones out there. And sometimes just a friendly word from someone else can make all the difference. So yeah, be friendly to everyone else, and appreciate it when other people are friendly to you. That's pretty much how we can avoid these temptations, and how we can avoid the sadness that will sometimes plague us, and sins, and all that other stuff. The wiles of the devil. We'll go with that. That's how we can avoid them, is to be united, be together, know that we are not alone, and even when we are alone and feel like the world is against us, the Lord is on our side, and he is pretty much straight up rooting for us. So, yep, keep that in mind, and remember that when you're feeling run down, and when you're feeling tempted for any reason, whether it be Doritos or depression or alcohol or whatever problems you may have, know that the Lord is on your side, and that he loves and appreciates you. And so I'll leave the lesson there with this wonderful view. Actually reminds me of the Rocky Mountains, but it's New Zealand apparently. Anyway, let me know what you think of the video. Let me know what you think of using this game in the video, and like and subscribe. I will see you in the next one. Bye.